Well, then Julian goes on and then talking about, remember she talked about this little hazelnut that God was never going to allow to fall from her hands. And it brings her in a vision to an understanding that everything that comes from God comes from his goodness. That everything God does is a manifestation of his goodness. That everything that happens in God's creation is a manifestation of his goodness. That everything that God allows, that what we would call evil, what we would call suffering, everything that God allows comes from God's goodness. And that because God is all good, nothing else can come. No shadow, no evil can come from an all good God. Now, we are accustomed to think of that as the love of God, but Julian, I think, makes it more concrete by talking about it as the goodness of God. And so we can see this, we can look at our own lives and what happens to us, and sometimes the ordeals that we have to go through, and we say, well, this comes from the goodness of God. I think today, perhaps more than many other times, when we are confronted with the coronavirus and all that it does in terms of sickness and death, that in the cloud of unknowing, if you will, in the darkness of faith, in the ray of darkness that God gives us, we are enabled to understand what Julian is being told, that yes, even this comes from the goodness of God. And that this is what Jesus had to do on the cross, even while he was saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? All of this comes from the goodness of the Father. And so, and that was manifest, of course, after his death, when he rose from the dead into the fullness of that goodness. And it was manifested to us, and we saw his glory, the glory of the only begotten Son of God. So this is also true of us, and this is true of the virus and of all the other evils that afflict the human race. I cannot give you an answer for each of these evils and why they're there and how they are from the goodness of God, but that is up to the faith capacity of each individual, to the love of Christ, to the extent to which their hearts beat with the heart of Christ who is within them, and who they will remember his words, do not be afraid. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. And this is where we are and where we stand, inundated, if you will, by the goodness of God. And as Julian proceeds in her visions, then the vision where she has the experience that everybody knows Julian for, and if people know nothing but Julian except this, they at least know at least the words of this vision. And that is when Julian starts confronting God because of things don't seem to be the way he talks about them. What about the goodness of God? You see, this is a problem for Julian, just as it was a problem for us. And Julian confronted God with her problem. And God responded to Julian's confrontation. And so the next, one of the following visions, Julian is given the words that are quoted as Julian's, but they're really the words of Christ when he said to Julian, all shall be well, and everything shall be well. And you will see for yourself that all manner of things will be well. So you see, this is God now defending the divine revelation of the abundance of his love in the blood of Christ and in the abundance of his goodness, in the totality of his goodness, because from his goodness only can come things that shall be well. And so Julian now is going to start confronting him on a different level, and she even starts getting down to specifics. And then she says, well, what about this? What about that? What about the suffering of innocent children? And so forth. But she starts out, I think she starts out by saying, what about sin? Because you see, there's only the goodness of God, and all shall be well. Well, what about sin in the world, which by definition is the opposite, I suppose, of goodness, you see? Well, and here is one of the things that I really love this. One has to be a little bit careful about your understanding of it. And it's very different from what we see in other teachers, but it's sound theology. He says, Julian, sin is necessary. This is the revelation of God and his love. Sin is necessary. And he says, why? He says, because it's really the only way that I can show the abundance of my compassion, my mercy, and my forgiveness. You see, we do say, and we can say, it's sin, and it's our sin that caused the death of Christ, the shedding of his blood. But we have to remember that the death of Christ and the shedding of his blood is only one part of the picture and not the greatest part. The greatest part of the picture is that he rose from the dead, that he ascended gloriously to the right hand of the Father, that he and the Father send the Holy Spirit who abides with us now as the love of Christ and manifests himself through his church in the cosmos. So the goodness of God is not frustrated by sin, but rather is manifested through sin. It causes God to exercise his forgiveness and his mercy. Now, again, we could get into the idea of what is sin and evil and the abstractions of philosophers and theologians, and I'm not going to do that. It belongs to another time, maybe, and another place. But the fact that we do, given an understanding that sin has its value because it brings about the commiseration, the mercy, the forgiveness, and the love of God.